So here's the thing, Greg.
I feel mocked. Go ahead.
The church does not know how to relate discipleship to politics.
Mm-hmm.
No one makes disciples anymore anyway.
Okay.
And work is not a 4-letter word.
Depends on who you ask.
Okay. Well, all I'm going to say is I think I did an excellent job becoming Greg.
Becoming Greg.
Mm-hmm. He made me do that.
You're making assertions?
I was like, Greg should do that.
No.
And you're like, no, you really need to this time.
I think people need to hear you have opinions too.
Now that I've been very assertive, I want to walk back.
Already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes we just, for shock value and fun, people do make disciples. So that was just a little exaggeration.
Hyperbole, if you will.
I like that word. I like that better than exaggeration. I'm going to use that in a lot of other situations in my life. Exaggerating. Hyperbole. All right. So you want to dive into some...
Let's go. You've dragged us into the deep water of politics.
All right. Well, maybe we start with what our church is doing.
Yeah.
And you can kind of explain that since you were a catalyst in those conversations.
Cool. I introduced a book called, what is that book called? Scandalous Witness. A little political manifesto for the church, or for Christians. Sorry, Lee, I don't remember the subtitle exactly.
Lee Camp.
He's an ethics professor at Lipscomb University, a former colleague of mine. Really provocative thinker and doing, I think, helpful work in challenging the church to think about politics in non-binary terms and non-escapist terms, both. And so...
You said non-binary, I just went down all kinds of rabbit holes.
Right.
I was like, well, that's a good conversation to have. No, sorry. Sorry.
It's all good.
I know. Yes. And so what has the church...
Yeah, so we have a Wednesday night discussion forum thing where we practice talking about difficult topics and exercising some fruits of the Spirit as we do that, and just thinking together and grappling with our differences of opinion. And I think we might have mentioned before that we started doing this based on a book called How the Church Talks. But so this has been our topic recently, and Lee's book has been our fodder for discussion.
Yeah.
And so we're already in our space here. We're already thinking about the church vis-a-vis politics and struggling with the way that on both sides of the political spectrum, Christianity gets co-opted and corrupted, and Lee likes to call it bastardized, and
he loves those shocking words.
Hyperbole, if you will.
Quote unquote shocking.
No, actually, I think he does. And in fact, we've had some folks say, he's being a little bombastic here. He's indulging in shock value. And my response to that has been, actually, I think he's trying to find language to talk adequately about the seriousness of the problem, right? Yeah. It's like, if the church has an illicit union with the political powers that be, the product is a bastard child. And so,
getting right in there.
Yeah. I mean, that I think it is provocative language, but then that's how the prophets speak too. And
sure.
They tend to turn a phrase here and there that makes you go, wow, did you have to say it like that?
That's right. So, Greg, how in the world can I'm somebody else right now. How in the world could your church have conversations about politics and not be a powder keg that blows up all over the place? I don't know how you could possibly do. How can you do that? I mean, I'm just imagining that a lot of people that are listening have got to be thinking that, and have actually, when I've told that we're talked about this with them, have been like, what? Because the only positions now, generally the positions are, we take this stand and you're for us or you're against us.
Yeah.
Or we'll keep talking about it and you can either just get over it or you'll walk out the door, and we're fine with that.
Yeah, so there's position taking, but there's not good faith conversation. And the question
100%.
the question that you're posing is,
How can you have good faith conversation because of all the position taking
right.
in the American church?
Yeah. Well, I mean, all I know is that we've managed to do that because we committed on the front end to good faith conversations. We said,
I think that's a key.
this is a priority for us to learn how to talk about difficult topics and do that well, do that in a way that honors Christ, do that in a way that builds the body. And that requires like strengthening muscles that atrophy if your position is this is a third rail and the best policy is don't talk about it, or just leave if you don't like the position that's taken.
Yeah.
And so, but you pointed out, I'll say this briefly so you can fill out what you meant by it, but you pointed out that at Stones River, we've done a pretty decent job of prioritizing a theology of the kingdom.
Correct.
That makes national politics secondary.
Yeah, we just don't take a stance, a hardline stance, which I have had people that are friends of mine. I've had family members that have left our church, Stones River, because we didn't take hard enough stance in A, B, or C hot topic area. Frustrated that you guys, we have to talk about this. Something that I wouldn't. Is it time to? I mean, the church relates to politics. I just want to make sure I'm staying on topic. One of the things that I've seen that challenges us relating to politics in the church is that there is a lot of this fear-mongering kind of thing that says they're coming after us. And generally it is right-wing people saying the left is coming after us if we don't take our stand. If Stones River doesn't stand up, they're going to take what, our parents have given themselves for and people have given themselves, and the church is not going to be able to be what it's always been kind of thing. And that's been language that I've heard whenever people have walked out the doors has been that kind of, we're afraid. We don't want things to change. Someone's coming for America.
Right.
And what do you think about that? We don't take those stance like you're asking that question.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
Yeah.
And so people will leave because of that as well.
On the one hand, I have no interest in a posture of fear. I mean, if that's how you're operating, I don't think that you're going to get very far anyway. If and all that leads you to is taking a stand, then in the second place, I'm not that interested in position taking.
Yeah.
For the church, position taking in a political sense, in a public sense, where the function of the church's theology is then to tell the world what our position on a political issue is.
Yeah.
And then more fundamentally, last, I think, I like the way that you framed the assertion to begin with. Position taking is not discipleship. And if your concern is our church as an institution isn't putting position statements on its website or something, then you're asking the wrong question. Like, how does our discipleship to Jesus as a community inform the way we engage politically with our society? And that's I'll take a position on that, and then the political world won't care because, as it happens, they don't care about discipleship to Jesus. That's not a political hot topic.
I'm reading a book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory by Tim Alberta, which is on your desk to read at some point in time, right? And in it, last night I was reading, and there was a pastor bringing up, one said what you just said, basically, like, if you're discipling your people well, then they'll make those decisions for themselves, whether they want to vote, whether they don't want to vote, who they vote for. And another pastor combating that said, well, that'll never happen. You'll never get anywhere by just saying that you're going to disciple people into being able to have these types of, like, that's ludicrous.
Yep.
And I was just like, that's an interesting that's an interesting statement there.
It's a dumb statement. I mean,
yeah. No, I'm with you.
How you gonna be a follower of Jesus and say discipleship will have no effect on the lives of people? What kind of an asinine thing to say is that?
Yeah, they basically were saying you can't do good enough job. Like people are dumb. Like that's kind of the thought. Like they need to be told what to do in certain situations.
Yeah, you're just telling me more about yourself at that point
Yeah.
than about discipleship.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
need you to tell them what to think about something. Okay. All right.
But I think this is why Stones River has been able to have these conversations, is because we have people that have an open mind, and there are some that have pretty strong political
Of course.
opinions, right, and views. And I'm going to say that in a sense of not the church as a politic, but red and blue, like just on one side or the other. But I do think that most have come to the table going, I'm willing to listen to the other side.
Yep.
And the people that aren't willing to listen to the other side have already left.
Yeah.
And I've seen them. I know who they are, and I can say their names and say, yeah, they're gone because they wouldn't listen because the other side has been demonized so much.
Yeah. Well, we also have some people that won't participate in this conversation because they have been so formed by the political discourse that they can't imagine the conversation being anything else than a fight about my position, no your position, no my position. And actually the conversation we're having, and this is part of what Lee does with the book, is to say, like, that's the wrong frame to begin with. The question about the church's relationship to politics in society among our neighbors is about how the church is itself an alternative politic.
Yep.
And if you're not starting there and instead you're just playing the game, you're just saying we are Christians who are also going to get in the trenches of this argument.
Yeah.
Then you've already surrendered.
Yeah.
You've already given power to the power that exists.
That's right. Yeah. And that goes back to when you said that we have a kingdom mindset or foundation or whatever, is that's it. Like we have a kingdom politic here. And I do think that a lot of the people that participate regularly have that kind of a mindset, that kingdom first, and that sets the foundation for being able to have these conversations. And I do think you doing the conversations about how to have these types of conversations is actually foundational as well. Like I think if you didn't do that, we could still have these, but I think that really helped, and also helped bring people in that might not have come because they would have said, oh, there's no way we can have conversations about. But because you did that, they're like, okay, well, maybe.
Right.
We'll see.
Yeah, it's at least worth test driving the practices of conversation that we're using, because that's what it is, right? It's a set of practices and of posture taking that if you don't think about that and you don't plan to do it a particular way and you just let it happen how it's going to happen, then the people that are afraid of the conversation have good reason to be afraid, because it's you know how it's going to go. I mean, we are shaped by our culture. Yeah. And our culture teaches us to argue in a particular way, not to talk, but to argue and to take positions. So anybody that says to me, well, it's just necessary that the church take a position. I'm thinking, all right, so you've given up the game already. You've already surrendered to the status quo. You've been shaped culturally in a way that you don't even recognize. You just assume this is how it is. Yeah. But
even being able to consider the other side, you've already lost, Greg. They're the worst.
Oh, right. Yeah, you should.
Right?
You definitely should only talk to people that agree with you. You should, essentially what you want is just an echo chamber that you can speak into, and then you can hear yourself be right. Yeah. That's the healthiest way to exist as a human. It's very good. That's how you grow. That's how you learn. Yeah.
Do you think that this would be, so putting the cards on the table, Greg and I are neither right nor left. We believe in a church politic. We can go into details about that or whatever. Do you think someone being a Republican or Democrat as a church leader would have a more difficult, potentially leading and guiding the church in this? Do you think there's a chance? Yeah, I'm just curious about that.
Potentially, yes, because what that probably means is, I mean, if you're identified with a political party, then again, you have already said these are the terms of the exchange,
That's why
of the
I asked.
relationship.
Yeah.
Right. You've already, and that's not necessarily the case, but probably
Yeah.
to a great extent, you've already said this is the shape of things, and however we talk has to fit into that shape.
Yeah.
And I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So what would you say to someone listening going, okay, I'm interested in taking our church that direction?
Mm-hmm.
I know we've mentioned a couple foundational pieces, but what are some pointers or some thoughts that you would have? Even if people that aren't in leadership, people that just want to be able to have these conversations with their friends. We've had people in our political conversations go, oh gosh, every time I try to do this with them, it's a powder keg. Someone's fighting. What are some thoughts about how would you disciple some people into maybe starting with church leadership and then maybe a conversation about friends?
Yeah, church leadership needs to take responsibility for reframing the conversation and setting the terms.
I like that.
Right? I mean, there's a spiritual responsibility there to say, not only is it possible for discipleship to make a difference, but that is our business.
Yeah.
And so then it's down to nuts and bolts in some sense. It's like, okay, so how do we do this in a way that is a practice of discipleship, that does center the Spirit in the conversation and calls the church to a kind of virtuous dialogue? And what does that look like? And how do you norm that? And how do you respond when things go off the rails? Because it can.
It can, yeah.
And
we
of
haven't
course-
had that happen.
No, but the point
it
is, we're prepared for it to.
Yeah.
We're prepared for it to, because the whole premise is, all right, we're going to talk about stuff that's difficult, and there's going to be some feelings, and there's going to be some triggers, and we're definitely not all going to agree.
Sure.
So anybody can come in having a bad day, and the conversation goes sideways, even if they're already sort of well-formed and participating in the structure of the thing. And so we know that that's the case. And part of the preparation that again, I think falls on the shoulders of church leaders is having a plan for that. Like, don't just let it blow up and be like, oh no, it blew up.
Because you could easily see someone coming in and monopolizing the conversation and, whatever. And also, as you're saying that, I'm also wanting folks to know, like, people express their opinions in our conversations and disagree. Like what you're saying, like there have been some moments that have and I think heated moments are fine actually, but I wouldn't say we've had really heated, but maybe warmed up.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Where people have gotten a little bit,
a little flushed.
Yeah.
Voice gets a little tense.
Yeah.
Volume raises a little bit. Right. Posture changes a little bit. I mean, so we've created a safe space for the conversation, and we've all sort of covenanted together to follow some rules that we devised.
Yeah.
So that safety means that it's okay to express your feelings, and it's okay for the rest of us to kind of help you navigate when those feelings are getting a little out of control.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But yeah, we haven't had any serious blowups. I expect eventually, if we keep practicing, we'll have some moments, particularly people coming in. I mean, one of the more difficult things about culture building is always, if it's not a closed culture, then you're going to have newcomers who are not well acculturated. And so whatever the nature, and this happens with the church all the time, right?
Yep.
You have new Christians or people coming in from a different church background, and it's kind of tough to learn the rules of the game and play along.
Yeah.
And that's just part of it, right? Unless you take a very authoritarian posture that squashes all of that on the front end, and you don't have to worry about it.
Okay. That's what I think we're going to do. Let's just take that. Yeah.
It's one option. I think Jesus said that we're supposed to lord it over others. Like that's how you exercise spiritual authority. It's lording it over others, like the nations. So,
speaking of that, would you say if a church has decided we are left or we are right, and this is a stance we're taking, they've already lost when it comes to the kingdom? They've screwed it up.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
do you see a situation where it makes sense, where you'd be like, oh, well, I get why they're saying that. lesser of two evils. Like that's what I get all the freaking time.
Right.
Like, yeah, but that's, I think they've lost.
Yeah.
I think I think that you're in a bad situation if you made this hardline call.
Yeah, well, because what you're talking about is ideological alignment.
Yeah.
You're not talking about a particular issue or a particular policy.
That's what
right?
Exactly right.
I mean, I expect the church to generally be in favor of policies that result in care for the poor. You know, it surprises me when that's not the case.
Yep.
But with any given policy, there's good faith conversation, and there can be reasons, and you can talk through that and so on. But that's not what you were asking about. You were asking about being left or being right.
That's right.
And that's an ideological alignment with a political system.
Yep.
That isn't the church.
Yeah.
And it's just almost unbelievable to me that anyone would think you can map the church's agenda onto any non-Christian political ideology.
Yeah.
That is an insane endeavor. And so wherever those dissonances are, wherever that disconnect is, you ought to be taking from that, oh no, I'm not left. I'm not right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that. That's not who we are, because our identity isn't this political party.
Yeah.
That's so much of the problem, is that to speak to your second assertion, in the absence of discipleship, you have a kind of empty church membership, an empty Christian identification that does not serve the function of forming identity. Mm. And so now I'm left looking around for, okay, so what is my identity? Right? Yeah. And the obvious answers on today's social landscape are largely political.
Yeah.
So yeah,
for sure.
Anytime that you have as a Christian taken on some other identity as your primary one, you've missed the mark.
So this is my last question before we move on to the next, which is right along those lines. Even though I said I was going to have another question. Yeah. This one is for the listener that's not in leadership necessarily, or could be, that does strongly identify left or right. Mm-hmm. And you're having these conversations. What would you say to that person, kingdom-wise, discipleship-wise, that's like, no, it's no. There's no way that the other side could potentially be a lesser of two evils, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Like, how would you challenge them to reshape a little bit, or at least go down the initial steps or path of what it looks like to have a kingdom politic, or look at things as a disciple? I know that's a lot.
Well, I'm just trying to think of the most straightforward way to say this.
And the reason I'm asking is because I think the majority of people are in that situation. Yes, I think the majority of Christians.
Yeah.
I'm not saying overwhelming, but I think that there's a huge chunk of Christians that have already made their stand.
Yeah.
And that may be listening going, I just don't get it.
Yeah. Well, but that's the thing. You don't have to get it. I mean, what are we starting from? We're starting from the statement, love your enemy, in the context in which your enemy is a servant of the Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. Right? This is a political oppressor. This is, if someone forces you to go the extra mile, what are we talking about? We're talking about Roman soldiers forcing followers of Jesus to carry their stuff.
Yeah.
Right. These teachings of Jesus are being said in the context of not just intense dislike, but of like hugely political situations.
Correct. Yeah.
Where my enemy is my enemy by virtue of their loyalty to Caesar, to their exercise of an entirely different way of life, an entirely different value set. And this is who Jesus says, bless them, pray for them, love them, serve them, give to them, right?
Yep. So
if your starting point is, I just don't get it, and there's no way, and they're totally wrong, and I could never, or whatever, it's like, so? What does that have to do? What does that have to do? Again, is your loyalty to Jesus? Mm-hmm. If so, then You go into the centurion's house and you heal that child, or heal them from afar, as it were.
Yeah.
You don't let the political difference, the ideological, the violent difference
Violent difference. Yeah.
that exists between you to determine your imagination about how you would relate to such a person or whether you would hear them out.
Yeah. It's so extreme, Greg, that like I've had conversations with people that like they hate the other side.
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'll bring up things like you're talking about, and it's like, oh yeah, you know I don't, but I'm like, yeah, you do.
No, you do.
You hate them.
Yeah.
And man, that's a tough position. I think a real honest reflection of yourself, if you've got some of those potential feelings, is a vitally important part of this.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, because this, again, it's like this has nothing to do with discipleship for you,
yeah,
right? It's like there's no connection here actually between your supposed following of Jesus and then your attitude toward the political other. Those two things live in two different worlds.
yep,
And so it's like, well, no, but I'm not, I don't, or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, you definitely do, because your discipleship has nothing to do with your political life. You think it does because you have reduced discipleship to holding some positions on things like abortion.
yeah,
So now I'm a good disciple of Jesus because I think that fetuses are babies and you shouldn't kill babies. So I'm a disciple of Jesus. Like that's not discipleship.
Yeah.
That is a particular position on an issue. And even if it's the right position, that's not discipleship.
yep. Okay. Well, I do want to say that if you haven't read The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory by Tim Alberta, it is, I think it could be very eye-opening for a lot of folks in looking at America and evangelicalism. And I feel like he's a very excellent journalist and has a very, in my opinion, unbiased approach to it. And it's quite excellent. So, all right, let's I love politics, but let's go to the next question.
Well, in a way, it's just a continuation, right?
It is, which has to do with no one makes disciples anymore.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, no one makes disciples anymore. Of course, I was exaggerating, but let me frame this up because this is something that I've been noodling on and asking friends questions a lot. First, I'll say for most of my time in ministry, I know we're all in ministry, bivocational. And so I think I was a salesman for like 13 or 14 years. And then about 5 years ago, raised funds, took the money that the church was giving me, put it all together, and was able to have a salary to, for 5 years, go and make disciples, right? Then a year and a half ago, I went back into the workforce. And I'll talk a little bit about all those, I think, maybe in the midst of this conversation. But the question that I've had a passion for forever and still have very much a passion is, how do we get people that are Sunday morning churchgoers to be people who are disciples and making disciples? And what are the roadblocks? And I mentioned my history because I've had a history of being on the side of having a full-time job and being like the folks that are sitting in those seats, and the position of having full-time chance to go out and make disciples. And so I asked a lot of our friends. Greg was one of them, of course, the first one. I have to ask Dr. McKenzie how he feels about this. But other friends, I said, what do you all think are the roadblocks? Why do we not have churches filled with passionate disciples that are making disciples and loving Jesus and on mission with God? What is preventing that? What are some of your thoughts on why people are not? There are certainly people who are serious disciples and disciple makers in the church. But why is that not the majority of people? Why is that the few rather than the big chunk of people? I know that's a loaded question and there's a lot to it, and we won't be able to talk about it all today.
Yeah.
But
Big
what are
question.
some of your, it's a huge question, and it's probably the question yeah, if I could do a dissertation, like this is something that I would really want to dig and continue to dig more into, for the sake of helping people become disciples and therefore then disciple makers and so forth and so on. So what are some of the things that rise to the top when you think about this question?
Tell me this, as you engaged in that process over those 5 years, did you find that people wanted to be disciple makers?
They would say they do.
Okay.
And I would say that one of my biggest takeaways from 5 years of not being in full-time, having a full-time job, was that it's a lot easier to talk about it than it is to do it when you do have a full-time job. And I have 3 sons at home and a wife at home, and there's a lot going on, and it is a challenge. I think there are people who it's kind of like, I'd love to play guitar. That would be a good thing. I'd love to learn Spanish. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really should, because there's some families in my neighborhood that speak Spanish, and I would love to. But I don't want to enough to like dedicate like what is actually necessary to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I ran into a lot of that. And the people that I primarily discipled during the 5 years were college students who did have more time, that had part-time jobs or were full-time students, and there was more freedom. And those are the ones that started house churches and disciple people and are still doing it to this day, and it's gone exceptionally well. I never could crack the code of getting the full-time 40-year-old mom, the full-time 40-year-old dad to take that leap. So that's why I was asking so many people, like, what do you think? What do you think is preventing that from happening?
Yeah. So it's not a lack of desire, apparently.
No, I think that most people would generally say we should do this as Christians.
Yeah.
I should be a serious disciple, and I should make disciples. You know, I have conversations, the believer versus the disciple thing, and like, you can be a believer, but you're not a disciple. And that's okay. You still have your salvation. Like, I've had these conversations with pastors, actually, that say, you know, there's just a few that'll actually be a disciple, John. You just need to kind of get over the thought of
come
having,
to terms with
that the masses are not going to be serious disciples, and focus on the ones that are, and not to heck with them, but you're trying to, lead a horse to water that doesn't want to go. Really, that's not really willing to do it. But I say no. I think that I really want to, and understand that having churches filled with them is maybe idealistic. But how can we start to knock down some dominoes? Mm-hmm. How can we start to have a few that start to look at their jobs and their careers? And I know people that are. But start to see it happen more regularly in the church, where they take being a physician, they take being a teacher at a school. And I know your wife takes it very seriously, who's a teacher at a school. Mm-hmm. So she's one that takes it very seriously. I know a lot of our ladies that are teachers, because we don't have, do we have any men teachers? We did. Yeah, and anymore. But the ladies that are teachers, I think a lot of them do take it fairly seriously where we're at. Yeah, I don't know. So what do you think?
Well, I think the question is really interesting, because there is a desire. There's a stated desire. There's a sense of guilt. Mm-hmm. There's a feeling that this is something I should do, not just that I want to. Mm-hmm. Like I want to be able to play the guitar. I would really like to be able to play the guitar, but I should be able to play the guitar. It's a different feeling, right? It's a different sense of importance. Our friend Kate pointed out the usefulness of the
Eisenhower quadrant model for whatever.
Yeah, so the quadrant that juxtaposes importance and urgency, right? And usually the things that are urgent make it to the top of your daily to-do list, whether they're important or not.
Yep, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And we all tend to fall into that mode of existence. It's very understandable. And her point was, it seems like a lot of Christians place discipleship in the important but not urgent category.
Yep.
Right?
I think that is spot on.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful.
Great analysis. Yep.
My response to that is, yeah, that's because of a theological error.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that discipleship is important, it's that it's absolutely urgent.
Yeah.
It's world-changing, life-altering, God-sized in importance.
And Jesus, like I want to be your disciple. I want to go back and bury my father. I want to do these things.
Yeah.
He's like, no, like we need to do this. This is important. And maybe we don't talk about things like that theologically, like as much as we really should. And that's it. Like,
well, so here, yeah, and here's
we kick the can down the road. We're like, oh, I'll be a disciple maker one day, and it's days and weeks and months and years, and nothing has changed.
Right. And here's how this theological error manifests. You can see it in the shape of the sentence or the phrase, churches full of disciple makers, which admits of the possibility of churches that exist that aren't full of disciple makers.
Yep.
So the theological error is that you could define the church apart from being disciples of Jesus who make disciples.
Yep.
That's not actually a thing.
There. Okay. I like it. I
right?
like it. Yep.
And so this is very analogous to saying, well, actually it belongs in the category of urgent. What I'm saying is it belongs definitionally in the category of necessary. It's not optional, right? And so many people that want to be a disciple maker, or even just to step back a little bit, want to be a serious disciple, treat that aspiration as optional.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not optional. You mentioned the believer versus disciple category. Stop allowing the distinction. There is no such thing as actual faith in Jesus that doesn't result in discipleship. The very essence of a false faith is one that doesn't produce discipleship, right?
That was my argument to when I've had this conversation. There's some folks I've had that with. That was my exact argument.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. It's a category error.
Yeah.
So there's theological work to do there that entails speaking the truth about that entails speaking a prophetic word to the institutional church, which is that church that exists theoretically without actual discipleship, the church of members, the church of believers, the church of converts, whatever you want to call it. Got to speak prophetically to that. You have to say, this is a lie. This is not real.
That's right. We have to challenge that.
Yeah.
Like, because there are people that I've seen this, that have just, what you're saying is a paradigm shift. Like, they've never been taught, like, you're supposed to be this. They've been taught, come to church, pay your offerings or tithes or whatever church wants to call it, and volunteer a little. You should read your Bible a little. That's what good. Pray some. Yeah. That's what good Christians do.
Yeah. Jesus is for getting saved. Jesus is not for teaching you how to live.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, he's a good moral example, and wouldn't we like to be like him? But we're not, and well, thank goodness we're saved.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's just such terrible theology. It's just so bad that it's one of the devil's greatest victories in the last 2,000 years is to convince so many people that they can be just believers, that faith without works is faith. And I'm not transitioning yet to our last topic, but that's essentially what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that dimension of it. Then you said they haven't been taught, and you were referring to this conception of the church as disciples. But here's another reason that we don't have a lot of disciple makers. Because we have a lot of people that have never been discipled. Yeah. And so they wouldn't know what to do in the first place. Yeah. Right? Say, I want to be a disciple maker. Well, nobody ever discipled me, so what would I do?
Yep.
What would I do?
No idea.
Right?
Yeah.
So
there's no model.
There's no model. We're starting in an absolute deficit.
Yep.
right? So that's why a lot of my focus in recent years in regard to discipleship has been working with church members who do have a desire for discipleship and bringing them into an environment where we focus on overcoming that hurdle of like, I realize you've never been discipled. You don't even know what this means. So let's start walking through this together with the intention that you will walk others through this together.
Yeah.
Right?
So what does that practically look like for you?
For me, that looks like inviting people who my wife and I, through conversation, determined to be actually serious and hungry and searching for something more than just coming to church. And inviting those people into a group that is fairly structured, that meets regularly, that is focused on discipleship practices. So we have a number of practices and models that we work through, so that it's not simply a small group, right? There's a whole small group movement, which has been beneficial and it's good and it does things and it's fine. But so much of that is actually just kind of a support group.
Yeah.
It's kind of a prayer group, and I tell you how things have been going, and you pray with me about it, and then we eat something and we go on with our week or whatever. Instead, there's a support component built into this. But from day one, the emphasis is we're interested in solving this question. What does it mean to take discipleship seriously? And once we're equipped with some answers to that question, we understand that the point is to invite others into the same experience, right? So, I mean, obviously I could walk you through some of the models and things we do or whatever, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah. I feel like we've done a poor job of modeling and illustrating what it looks like to be a teacher that's a disciple and a disciple maker. Like the church hasn't lifted up the factory worker that is actually like it's just the preacher's preaching his sermons or whatever it is, or her sermons, whatever. But we're not saying, hey, this is what it looks like, and we're inviting people into this. And so there is no framework in a lot of people's brains for what does that look like as a air conditioning technician. Like what is it? I don't even understand. And I think that's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Like we just haven't modeled, we haven't taught, we haven't shared that, and so there's just that's it. And we've been satisfied with status quo kind of Christianity or whatever.
Yeah, there's a limited imagination, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of us have kind of, whether we've been taught it overtly or not, we've kind of absorbed the idea that what you really want as you mature as a Christian is to just sort of learn to be a good person.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so if I can be a good person at my job, right? Honest, don't steal.
Absolutely.
Work hard, take care of my family. Like that's it. That's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
And it would be insane to say that any of that isn't good and right.
Sure.
But it's the limit of our imagination.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the vision of discipleship that I find in the New Testament is far more expansive than that.
Yeah. That's right. It's like this, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It's like this false idea that being a Christian is being good morally, and you don't
or
cuss.
Worse, just being nice.
Yeah. I was going to say, you don't cuss, you don't, whoever maybe say you don't drink or smoke, all these like things like that. And we're just supposed to, and I'm just like, that's just not the Bible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's not at all like what it means. And so it's like having to reframe our entire theology of what it means to be a follower of Jesus and disciple of Jesus and all that. And like, it's a lot of work, like to bring people into that paradigm shift.
Well, it's costly, right?
It's very costly.
This is the essence of discipleship, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Bonhoeffer's classic book, The Cost of Discipleship. I mean, that's the English title, but it's perfect. But Jesus is the one that talks about counting the cost of discipleship. And the cost of the paradigm shift is tremendous, because when you have so many church members who are putting dollars in the offering plate, who have spent their entire lives being told that, showing up on Sundays is kind of your major
Yeah.
obligation. And then you say to them, actually, this is an entire lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
that is going to require of you a very different set of priorities.
Yeah.
They're going to bail. I mean, that's
Yeah.
not what they signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're starting at a deficit, but it's worse than just a deficit of understanding what discipleship is. We're starting with a church that is by and large convinced that it's not necessary, and if you ask it of me, it's too high a price.
That's it. And so going back into the work world, I mean, what I've realized is this has to be my top priority of my life, right? Like, is being a disciple of Jesus. Like, for example, I like to play music and stuff, and being a disciple can influence that, and you can use the arts as a disciple. But if it's not the top priority, things are just going to the urgent run my life.
Mm-hmm.
And and so you have to have the paradigm shift. You have to count the cost and have to realize this is the most important. This kingdom and being a disciple is vital, and it has to happen now. Until you do that, I don't think you can be a real serious disciple of Jesus and make disciples.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't think that that's possible when it's optional, or gee, that would be nice.
Have you found any other answers to the barrier question?
I thought that, yeah, I mean, so the Kate stuff was really interesting, the idea of the urgent. And I will say that we don't need to let the urgent things run our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I use this analogy as I'm a salesperson. I have 1 billion emails that come in every day, and I need to carve out space to prospect and to try to make sales. But I could easily just answer emails all day long, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And I feel like that's kind of how we are as Christians so much. It's just like we're just, whatever fire is up, whatever's taking place, whatever, we're just kind of doing it. And it's hard. You have to hang out the cost to go, no, I am going to create intentional spaces and space in my life to be intentional so that I can become a true disciple of Jesus. And I guess until we make that determination, I don't know. I don't know if it's possible if you haven't made that paradigm shift in your life.
Yeah.
So if someone's listening and going, well, that sounds nice, I think I would almost start there with what Jesus started with, was counting the cost and the seriousness and the urgency of it. And this is what it means to follow Jesus straight up. Like, there is no option to just go to church.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting similarity between what Jesus is instructing these would-be followers to do and what you're supposed to do with the Eisenhower matrix, which is inventory.
Yeah.
Like, you have to literally go like, okay, list it all out. And in the case of discipleship, ask the question, what dies?
Yeah.
Literally, what part of my life has to die for this to be real?
That's right.
And as we were saying with some of Lee Camp's language in his book, that is an appropriate way of putting the question, because you're talking about the death of parts of your life.
Yes.
It's not just reshuffle and reschedule,
change things a
and
little
add
bit.
something to my calendar.
Yeah.
It's like you literally, the reality we live in, where we are so consumed with all of this urgent, trivial stuff, or urgent, important stuff. Sometimes what you're killing is really important. You don't have the option to just sort of lightly reshuffle the deck.
Yeah.
You're going to have to kill some stuff.
Yeah.
Or, well, rather, let it be crucified.
Yep. That's right. Yeah. And so very practically, like, I always like to think very practically of the father or mother that has a full-time job, that their kids are in 3 sports or, whatever. Maybe you have a hobby yourself, and different things like that. Like, you have to really do a serious evaluation of your lifestyle, don't you?
Yeah.
Like, and just asking, like, what is the most important? And some of it, what I've learned is, like, maybe it means my kids don't participate in that many sports.
That's right.
Maybe it means when they do, I have a completely different paradigm shift now, and I'm focused on how can I build relationships with the other parents that are on the soccer team. How can I serve them? How can I be hospitable towards them? Like, I don't know if there's like a silver magic bullet to say you have to do this, but there's a lot of discernment and prayer and going, okay, I need to reevaluate. And I guess for me, a budget like brings it to my analogy with money. So many people just go, I don't have any money and I don't know where, but it's because you're not being intentional with it. You're not prioritizing where it needs to go. And, we're not, doing that. And when we're not doing that, it just, oh, there it goes. I don't know what I'm doing. And we have to treat our discipleship like it needs to be like vitally important. And we have to take inventory, and we need to, through serious prayer and discernment within a group, preferably, like start really thinking through this kind of stuff. Yeah. And I mean, for me and my kids, like my kids have not participated in a ton of sports, and I don't think that there's anything wrong. I mean, the reason is because we just don't have time to do all kinds of things because there's a priority of the kingdom that.
That's right. That's been the same for us.
Yeah.
I mean, we have kids that have been in sports,
Yeah.
that are in sports.
I do too.
And that wanted to do travel ball, right? Because the way that American sports are now, it's great. It's so different than when I was in school. But it's like my son tried out for the middle school baseball team. He's been playing baseball for years.
Yep.
In rec league, but he's never been on a travel team. And the cost of that was there was no way to make the team at the middle school because all of the kids making the team
have been on travel.
They've been on travel ball team for years. They've been playing year round. They've got thousands more reps than he does at everything.
Yeah.
And he's athletic, he's good,
Yep.
but there's just no way. So the only option, if you want to actually play in high school level sports at a school of any size, you have to shell out and do the travel ball.
That's
right. Well, so there's a financial component to that. There were reasons that was not going to happen financially.
But time-wise.
But there was also a priority. It was like, listen, we are not going to reshape our family's life around traveling to ball games. That's not who we are.
Yep.
And as much as it would be helpful for becoming a better athlete and as whatever the good parts of that is and scholarship opportunities later on and all that kind of stuff, no, we're not going to. Of course, it's possible to figure out the money. We're not going to because that's not the life that we're going to live.
I'm very thankful to my parents who, like, I had the chance to be on some travel ball teams when I was a kid, and they just said, no, like, sorry, we have other priorities, and they were kingdom priorities, and it taught me from a very, and that's the cool thing, because I think a lot of parents might be going, oh yeah, but my kids are going to miss out.
Oh, they will.
But what I was taught, why I am where I am right now, why I am so passionate about disciple making, one of the reasons is because my parents taught me that this is a priority. This is the priority. The priority is not getting a scholarship with baseball. I played a little bit of high school baseball, actually. I did, but there were other sports and stuff that I didn't because they were just like, no, we're that's not going to be what our focus is on our life. And my God, I'm thankful that they taught me that while I was 12 years old, while I was 11 years old. So I think when parents are thinking, oh, what are they going to miss out on? I'm thinking, what are they going to miss out on the flip side?
Right.
Whenever you're teaching them that this is a priority. Yeah. That missing gatherings with the believers regularly because you're on the football team or whatever and you're traveling all the time and whatever, that is the most important thing. And man, it some serious life evaluation when it comes to this, which is why Jesus said, count the cost.
That's right. That's right. Can you think of an adult example? Something that, the travel ball thing is pretty on point in our family's experience. And I appreciate that you said we're not being prescriptive here. This isn't a silver bullet. It's not
No,
like
because
that we're not saying that this is what everybody's supposed to decide.
because
We're
I've
saying
seen
the reason we
That's
decided
right.
was this.
That's right. And I know people who have made disciples with sports.
Right.
Like they have said, no, this is actually going to be our ministry. This is going to be prayerfully, God is calling us to this mission to reach out to these other families. So that's why I don't want to say there's this.
No, of course not.
This whatever. But you mean like
Examples of an adult life sort of rearrangement. What are we talking about? Watch less Netflix. I mean, what
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it goes back to the urgency and the priority, and me going, what is the most important? Because I could easily, without a doubt, work till 4 or 5 o'clock every night. Hey, we have to make dinner for the family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna eat dinner with my family. And by that time, I'm freaking exhausted, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what am I don't feel like doing. I want to turn Netflix on and I want to watch a few episodes. I want to have a glass of wine and I want to go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get up and do that the next day. And I think you've got to reevaluate what's the most important and how can I, in my job, whatever the situation, how can I reshape this and reframe this into how can I make disciples where I'm at?
Mm-hmm.
How can I make disciples within my job? How can I find time? What are avenues? Like for me personally, like we're doing this podcast, like one of the things that I've done is I have a real heart for media. And so I wake up in the morning early enough. I spend some time with the Lord and I record videos about discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be so much easier to not do that,
Mm-hmm.
to just get up, have my cup of coffee, even read my Bible and go to work.
Mm-hmm.
But I've said, no, the kingdom is a priority. I've got to make sure that this is taking place. And then I know you're huge into
hey, take it easy.
You're huge. You're so huge, man. Into the community aspect of it and how vitally important it is. Like what you said, the first steps or a lot of it is forming that community of people where you can do this. So what would you say to the churchgoer that's listening, that's not in a leadership place, that says, I want to do this. I don't really know where to start, but I think the idea of community is very important. How would you guide them into starting something like that?
I mean, you have to find like-minded people, right?
Yeah.
So it's a similar thing where we're having conversations and we're talking with people and realizing, all right, this is somebody that's they're serious. They don't know what to do, but they really mean it.
Yeah.
They're hungry for something else. You find people like that, and
which takes a lot of intentionality.
It does.
And time.
Yeah, it means having certain conversations and not other conversations, right? It means looking for that shared heart with people, and that's not obvious necessarily. Not least because people are often so caught up in doing all the other stuff that they're doing, and nobody is asking them those kinds of questions. That's not what conversations are about, right?
Yeah.
But the next step, and this is really important for our discipleship groups, is to commit to one another, to spend the time necessary to figure it out.
Yeah.
So
which is creating some serious space.
Creating serious space. So this is like one of the first asks that we make of people, and we make it immediately so that they get the idea that this is challenging. This is not an invitation to a 1-hour meeting where we're going to do a little thing and then you go on your way. This is, hey, if you're serious, then we're going to give this time. And that's going to mean for us, we often do, because of the way people's schedules are structured, we often do a Sunday afternoon time together. And I tell them on the front end, we will not put a clock on this. So if you have,
Very charismatic of you.
well,
Just kidding.
no, actually, that is absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we're going to do is let the Spirit lead us.
Yeah.
And that means we're done when we're done.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not going to work for you. And you are not invited if
Wow.
you
yeah.
have a hard out at a certain time on Sunday afternoon, right? It's just not going to work. We can't create the necessary space if you're looking at your watch. Well, I got to go in 15.
Yeah.
No, our first commitment is we're going to be together until whatever it is that we are working on in this time is done.
Yeah.
And that usually, I mean, on average, I would say we meet from 1:30 to 4, around there.
It's a pretty lengthy period of time.
Yeah, it's lengthy. I mean, we have breaks. You know, it's not like
you eat.
Yeah, we eat. We have cake break. We always break time with a dessert and coffee and that kind of thing. But the point is that commitment on the front end is non-negotiable, right? This is how we know we're going to take this seriously.
So you would counsel people that if folks aren't willing to do that, then move along.
They're not ready
until you find till you
Yeah.
find somebody that is.
That's right.
Or folks that are.
Because if the whole point is discipleship is going to result in rearranging our lives, and the very first indication is I'm not willing to do that,
Yeah.
then you know they're not ready,
They're not ready.
right? Maybe they will be, maybe in another. And I mean, obviously, you have to negotiate with everybody. Like, what's the time going to be? When can we do this? How does this
Sure.
work with our schedules, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying you dictate that and then just tell everybody to, lump
Yeah.
it or whatever. Saying once you have come to an agreement that, all right, here's the space where this could work,
Yeah.
then you have to say, are you in? Are you committed to
doing that.
letting this be what it is? And that means time. That means time that you're not, the first time that we did this years ago, we did it on a Sunday afternoon, and after months of discipleship group, people started kind of talking about like their perceptions at the beginning and their doubts. And when they started, we're like, we don't really know if we're going to be able to do this because we do our laundry on Sunday afternoons. Like, it's the time of the week that we have. Like,
you know
what I mean? It's like
it's practical and real.
yeah, it's like I don't know how our week works anymore if we're giving away 3 hours every Sunday on top of going to church.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. It's not. It seems like small stuff, but it's not. It's not. It's like you're asking people whose lives are packed full. They're exhausted. They're overworked. They have so many commitments, so many asks. Forget about, do we have time for date night this week?
Yeah.
Or can we just go out one time and chill and have fun? Like, all of that is precious. And then you're saying, yeah, I need you to make a big chunk of space for discipleship. It's vitally important.
It is. And the busyness of our lives are not entirely necessary. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we live in a culture and a society, and I do understand that there are single moms and single dads that work 2 or 3 jobs, and they're going to have to look at it from a different perspective. So it's not always, but I think that a huge chunk of people, it's just a priority thing. Like, we have to realize the soccer practices, the dance things, all that stuff. We don't have to do these things. We have made our lives unbelievably busy, but we don't have to do that.
Jesus will set you free.
Yeah.
I mean that in all seriousness.
Yeah.
That stuff is bondage. Whenever it feels like I don't have a choice, I'm trapped, this is how it has to be. That is the definition of bondage, right?
Yeah.
And to come to the realization, no, it doesn't have to be that way, actually.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to. And the way that this can work is because
That's right.
I have the support of a community of disciples, right? So there is practicality in this. There's stuff, hey, can you get my kid to practice tonight?
You
know what I mean?
I was going to bring that up, actually.
Yeah. I mean, you carry each other's burdens.
Yeah.
You make it work.
Yeah, your lawnmower breaks down, you can borrow somebody else. Like, like we were designed
Yeah.
to live in community with each other like this.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yep. So I'll just share one of the practices that we do because it's very relevant to this conversation.
Okay.
It's the most difficult. It's the thing that consistently I have the most pushback. I have the most complaints. I have the most not happy about this.
Okay.
And then extremely happy afterward, right? Sabbath. Practicing Sabbath in a serious way.
Yep.
Is a discipleship practice.
Yep.
I'm not going to get into all the details of what that means, but here's the gist of it, right? You make more space for God and rest. And you do, we're not talking about having a 15-minute quiet time.
Yep.
We're talking about taking a day out of your week, unplugging from everything, saying no to everything, and being with God and your family.
Yes. Yep.
And making that space for Americans is a kind of death.
That's right.
It is so hard.
So what do you say? And this has been one of my challenges that I've heard from a lot of people. I'm on board, but my spouse isn't.
Oh,
You know what I mean? Like it's like I brought this up to my spouse and they said, "What do you mean? I'm going to have to do all the laundry?"
Yeah.
Like it's just this immediate like, "Oh, well, if you do that, then I'm going to have to take on the burdens of all this." And so, I don't know, what do you say? What do you like? That's tough.
that's really
That's really tough if
Yeah.
you are all about it and your spouse goes,
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's called being unevenly yoked.
Just get divorced and move along.
No.
Just kidding.
No. But that is so real.
Yeah.
Just as the single mom thing is real, and the I have to work 3 jobs thing is real. Like they're financially this is the situation, and I mean you can just go on and on. We're talking about real life here. We're talking about this is not trivial. Like we're all people of leisure and we have huge budgets and don't have to worry about it. And no, like there's a lot going on. But okay, I hesitate because I don't want to give the trite spiritual answer. But this is something I believe. Seek first the kingdom and God's justice, and the rest will be added. Now, that's a huge leap of faith. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds cheesy. It sounds unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, it is absolutely true.
Mm.
God is trustworthy in this.
Yeah.
Right? And part of the way that the provision happens, again, is through the community of disciples. It's not just magically everything works out.
Yeah. It's
that you have fellow travelers who will sacrifice parts of their life to make it work for you.
Yep.
And I have to think that that's also the case with a difference of opinion in a marriage about the importance of discipleship.
Mm.
And that's going to be a really difficult, touchy situation. But it's also really particular. In each case, it's going to really depend on people involved and the actual details of the situation. And if the community will commit to trying to answer some of those particular questions. But all right, so how does this work for you? Then it becomes a real possibility.
I like it. Next question. Are we ready? Yeah. This is something I could talk about for hours.
Let's go.
I know. All right. So the final question has to do with work is not a 4-letter word.
Mm-hmm.
We did a men's retreat in the summer, and Greg wonderfully led us in Titus, and we began to talk about, and this is pertinent to being a disciple. Obviously, this just continues the conversation. Participating, having a lifestyle of good works.
Yeah.
First, I think we address the faith versus works thing.
Yeah.
because as soon as I say anything about works, I know that there are people that are
Alarm
potentially
bells.
listening.
Yeah,
Alarm bells go off. Like, no, it's not works. Whatever. It's just faith in Christ alone. Whatever. How important are the works? And how do we orient our lives in that way? But actually, let's go theological first. Sorry.
Okay.
Let's go theological first. What do you say to the person that is squeamish when you begin to talk about works?
Read the Bible.
You would say that they have a bad theological...
I would say that they're reading selectively.
Okay.
If they think that there is such a terror of works righteousness to be found in the New Testament that
I like that, terror of works righteousness.
yeah that works have become not only optional but suspicious.
Yeah.
Right. They've become a threat to real faith, right? The saving faith, where they are a problem for legitimate Christian understanding of the way that Jesus saves.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say read your Bible.
I know that's a loaded question. Greg actually preached a message.
Yes.
2 or 3 weeks ago about this, and he got into the new perspective of Paul and on Paul and all this really, really, really good stuff. But for the person that is squeamish, that's what you would say. You would say dive into your word. And
Well,
really looking at...
instead of being a jerk about it, I wouldn't say precisely that, but the gist of it would be, yeah, okay, so we got to talk about some passages of Scripture, including Titus, who is obsessed with good works.
Yeah.
His language is be dedicated to, committed to, and zealous about good works. And it's the thread that runs through the entire letter.
Yeah.
It's the main theme. But here's the thing. Paul is obsessed about this all through his letters, not just Titus.
Yeah.
Right? It is not the case that Paul takes the line that works are a problem and you're saved by grace, not works. And it's James who says,
exactly.
No, actually, works is important. That's how you know what real faith is. They agree about this.
Yes.
And the misreading of Paul has such power historically, and there's a whole long sort of history of evolution, theological evolution through the Protestant Reformation that we don't have to get in the weeds right here, but the gist is the realization that we are saved by grace regardless of our performance of particular rituals and religious activities was really important for people like Luther, and had a lot to do with the shift out of Roman Catholicism that became the Protestant Reformation. It wasn't that initially, but it became that. That was a really important theme, really important idea. It produced these slogans about salvation through grace alone, by grace alone, through faith alone, right? And so on. So what I would say to that is, yeah, duh. Like, yes, that's definitely true. You're saved by grace, and you can't, quote, earn your salvation. But I would also say nobody ever thought you could. Nobody ever thought you could. And the misreading is where Paul talks about works of the law and connects that with an idea of righteousness, the way that was read through Luther's lens and then others after him, sort of misconstrues what's at stake there. It's not the case that the Jewish people ever thought that they were saved by works of righteousness.
Yeah, correct.
That's just not real.
No,
and
they were saved by God's grace.
They were saved by grace.
Choosing.
Right? Yeah, they were saved by grace through the covenant. Right? And covenant keeping is very important for them and for us.
Yeah, that's right.
And so part of keeping covenant is responding to the grace of God with good works.
Yeah.
But it's important to recognize that that explanation of the relationship is too linear. It's too linear. It's not just that we're saved by grace and then we're thankful and so we do good works. It's way more fundamental than that. It's that we're saved for the purpose of good works. That, as Paul would say, you were created for good works. And salvation is your recreation.
Yeah.
So that what you should have been doing all along, what God always wanted and still wants, is for you to be committed to, dedicated to, and zealous for good works. Be good because God is good.
Yeah.
This is the essence of the transformation that comes in Christ.
God is doing good works. That's who he is.
That's who God is.
And when we participate with him, it's the inevitable byproduct that we are participating in good works.
But let me say, I don't disagree with you, but I worry that the word byproduct makes it a secondary sort of incidental thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think of it as a byproduct. I think of it as existence.
Yeah.
It is the nature of transformation.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good way to
say it. It is becoming Christ-like.
Yep.
Right? And when Paul talks about this, he is not worried, nor is he thinking about the possibility that you think by becoming Christ-like in the grace of God through the Holy Spirit's work in your life, all of a sudden you're earning your own salvation. Like that's just not even
in the Bible.
It's not even on the on the radar.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so if for some reason somehow you came to think that you could be good enough for God, if that happened, well then you're wrong. And you shouldn't think like that.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with Scripture's robust expectation that God's people will do good works.
Yeah. I think something that came out of the retreat that we had, it was really good because I saw in my own life and in the lives of many of the men that were on the retreat a serious reflection. Because we can go back to our conversation about discipleship, about the urgency, about the things that the bad budget of letting our life just kind of run itself, that it's caused us to not be devoted, zealous, so forth and so on to good works, because we're just trying to exist. We're just trying to make it. And good works is an option.
Yeah.
That's what I should do some good works. I don't think I'm saved by them, but I think I should. But what does it freaking look like to be like zealous for this? What does it look like? Could you say that your life is devoted to good works? And I'm just thinking of the men that were there, and I think many of them would say, no. Yeah. I'm not devoted. No, I'm not zealous for
wish
this.
I was.
I wish I was.
Yeah. That seems like a really good thing to be.
Yeah. And some of them have like hurtful things that have happened in the past.
That's right. Yeah.
Right?
This is complicated.
Yeah, like I've attempted to do some of this stuff. I
got burned by it.
Yeah, I got burned. Yeah, exactly right. And so it's multifaceted and all that kind of stuff, but it's absolutely necessary. And I just think of the image, the reflection that the American church has on what it means to be a follower of Jesus, and how we can go back to politics and the conversation that we've had before and all this stuff, and to say, like, we have the beauty, the responsibility, all the stuff of reflecting that we can do this. Like, we can show the world who God is and what he desires to do as we participate with him in these good works. And it just, again, maybe I'm idealistic, but a church dedicated to good works, devoted to good works.
Well, if you're idealistic, so is Paul. I mean, it's the right thing to be.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so let's reconcile ourselves to the truth that Paul needed to write this to Titus. He knew that this church wasn't.
No, they're lazy. They're
gluttons.
They're gluttons.
Cretins.
Creeps.
But, okay, so the reality is, yeah, we can definitely exist in a mode in which it's necessary for the apostle to write us a letter and say, hey, stop being lazy.
Yeah.
Devote yourself. Get excited.
You could say that to
Be
the
all
American
about.
church.
You can and need to.
Yeah.
And need to. The reason that we address this works righteousness thing and the salvation by faith thing is because it has bizarrely become a barrier to having this conversation with the
100%.
church.
Yes.
Where everybody now has this safety blanket of like, well, I don't do that because I'm not trying to be saved by works. And
Yeah.
are you serious? Are you kidding me right now? Have you read the book of Titus?
Yeah.
Have you read what Paul says in Romans, no less?
Oh,
right?
Yep.
Like, this is the point. This is what you're made for and remade for, recreated for. This is life. This is participation in the work of God. My Father is always working, Jesus says. My Father's always working. And so am I.
Yes.
Right? Because I'm working in response to the Father. Like, this is the nature of this is what you're saved for.
Yeah, that's right. So what would you call good works? We've had this conversation before. So if someone's going, well, okay, this is I'm with you. I'm with you, Greg.
Yeah.
But what do you mean? What do you mean by good works?
What do you think I mean by good works?
We had a conversation about N.T. Wright's definition of good works, and what I think that you mean participating in the good works that Jesus is doing, that God's doing, that the Father's doing, and that's taking care of the poor. That's caring for the orphans. That's I think it's pretty simple and straightforward, and I think that sometimes we convolute it maybe to give ourselves an excuse why not to do it potentially. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I think it's nice it's convenient to reduce good works to kind of, again, like being nice inside your,
just like kind of moralistic,
helping out stacked chairs at church and being a good tipper and whatever it is that you feel like makes you a good person. My understanding of good works is, like I said, Jesus's perception is that he is working in response to the Father's work.
Already doing,
right? I think that is the right vision of the church's life. I think of that as participation in God's mission, right? I have a missional theology that kind of frames all that up so that God is actively at work in the world for God's purposes. And so really the answer to the question is, well, what do you think God's purposes are? And there's a lot to say about that, but essentially it's like, all right, get your head around the kingdom of God that Jesus proclaims. What does that kingdom look like? It's a place where there is liberation from the forces of evil, the experiences of the oppression of evil, where there is healing, where there is forgiveness and reconciliation, where there is the inclusion of people who are socially marginalized, outcast, where there is an inversion of power and the use of power, where there is an elevation of the notion of service and humility, and the list goes on, right? But you get your head around the vision that Jesus casts of the kingdom of God. And what is the kingdom of God? It's the place where the will of God is done. Your kingdom come, your will be done, right? This is a parallelism. This is a restatement of the same thing. When the kingdom comes, that is the place where the will of God is done. So if that's what the will of God looks like, it looks like daily bread for everybody. It looks like forgiveness of unmerited forgiveness of debts, right? It looks like protection from evil. Looks like the glorification of God. That's good works.
That's good works. It's much more than getting your salvation.
Oh yeah.
Like it's so much more than that. Well, so maybe to head towards a close, I guess I'm always thinking of the listener and the people that are going, I do need to participate in good works more. Like I don't think I'm participating in what the Father's doing on a regular basis, I have stacked chairs in the church or
Mhm,
whatever, and
And
that's
good for you.
great.
We need that
No,
help.
we need that.
Please,
Yeah,
please, please, please.
So
I don't want to
please,
stack them by
yeah,
myself.
please stack them. But what is it? What are some initial steps? I know I say this kind of stuff regularly, to being a person who is actually devoted to good works. What would be some of those steps that you would encourage people to start to head down the path?
Take that community of discipleship and work on the practice of discernment.
Yeah.
Because
Figured you would say that.
Yeah, how do you know what God is up to? Well, on the one hand, you can make some educated guesses. Like, all right, I know God loves the widows and the orphans and the foreigners and the poor. So I'm going to do things for those people. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. But there's a deeper sense in which the question is, right around me, in the lives of my neighbors,
Yep.
what is God up to?
Yep.
What's the work? Right? And there are specific answers in specific places, because God's work isn't supposed to be reduced to some principles of like ethical priority.
Yep.
Right? Those are good. I don't have any problem with principles or ethical priorities. But the question that we're asking when it comes to good works is, how do I figure out what exactly God is doing in our midst?
Here. Yep.
And the church comes to conclusions about that through what we call discernment.
Yeah.
And we do that together. That's not a solo sport. And we do that incessantly and repeatedly.
Yeah.
In order to stay connected and responsive, because remember, the Spirit blows where it will. So you got to be figuring out where the Spirit's blowing right now.
Yeah. And I want to hammer home what you just said in the sense of the idea of it in community, because I come from a background, which if you've been listening, from a charismatic background. And I think that oftentimes in that background, it's hyper individualistic, like me and my relationship with the Spirit, and the Spirit will tell me where the Father's working and so forth and so on. But I think that it is absolutely vital that we recognize that we are part of a body, that God has always worked in community from the rip. Like he's always worked with the people of God in that process of discernment. And you see that throughout the New Testament, what that looks like in Corinth and other places, of what does the church look like when they're trying to discern together. And yeah, I mean, I think that that's a vitally important step. I think we can't skip that. I think we can listen to this podcast and go, well, I'm going to go spend more time in my prayer closet. Should. Yeah. But you have to, it's not an option. Find other like-minded believers that are ready to do the same thing. Because whenever I had my 5 years of doing this disciple making thing, there were seasons and times, even though I had other brothers that were involved, that I kind of felt alone, because we had some type A personalities.
Yeah.
So that this person was going here, this other person was going there, this person was going there. But I promise you, the most fruit was bore when we came together. And we decided to discern together, and we decided to be on mission together, and we decided to go to hookah bars together, and we decided to do things like that. We were discerning that God was calling us to those places, without a doubt, 1,000%, far more fruitful than whenever I was by myself trying to figure it out.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. The community part of this is part of what to go back to our discipleship conversation, right? Again, we tend to imagine discipleship and me being a disciple in individualistic terms.
Absolutely.
Right? And just understand that is not a part of the New Testament vision.
Yep.
Jesus calls disciples. He doesn't call disciple.
Yep.
Right? And
it's one of the first things he did.
That's one of the first things he
grabs
did.
a bunch of disciples
and
build community.
And Paul writes the letter to Titus for the church.
Yeah.
And he's not saying each of you individually be dedicated to good works. He's saying you, the church of Crete, be dedicated together. You, plural, be dedicated.
Yep.
Live that life together, right? And over and over and over and over in the New Testament, that is the operative paradigm. There is no such thing as solo discipleship. Obviously, it's personal. Right? Obviously, I'm my own self and my mind and my thoughts and my heart and my conscience, all of that. It's inescapable. Yes, of course. And
yes,
you are called into a community of faith.
That's how you were designed to live.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's straight up it. Like, we weren't designed to be isolated and go into our own fortresses after we're done with work and do our own thing and show up to church on a Sunday and go to a gathering and maybe we'll shake hands with somebody, but we're not doing life together.
Right.
You weren't created for that.
Nope.
And maybe that's, if you sense something is off, that's one of the reasons something is off, because you were created to just sort of have some relationships here or there, or listen to a preacher preach and kind of do the thing. You were created to do life together.
Yeah.
Well,
that's where we end it right there.
Okay, that's where
you
we
were
end it.
created to do life together.
That's it. All right. Well, that's Word.y.
That's the word.